my son's birthday party, my mother-in-law asked, "What did you buy with the monthly allergy fund?" I giggled. "Stop it, Mom. You know Tommy doesn't have allergies, just asthma." But she didn't look like she was joking. "The $500 I send every month for his special allergy treatments." Peter said it was severe. I shook my head bewildered. She pulled out her phone. "I've been sending money for 18 months. She showed me her bank app, scrolling through transfer after transfer. My heart stopped. $9,000. While we'd been surviving on rice and beans, I stared at the transfers, each one going to an account ending in 5333, my husband Peter's business account. "We've never seen an allergy specialist. Tommy doesn't have allergies," I whispered. I turned to Peter, who was now standing frozen by the sink. "You've been stealing money meant for our son?" The silence was deafening. "You told your mother Tommy had severe allergies while I rationed his asthma inhaler to make it last?" "It's not what you think," he started. I grabbed his phone from the counter. "Then show me the account." His hands shook as he unlocked it. There they were. Deposits from his mother, then withdrawals. Diamonds Gentlemen's Club, $300, $500. VIP room, $1,000. "Strip clubs," I said, my voice hollow. "You invented our son's medical condition to fund strip clubs." His mother gasped. "Peter, I sent that money for my grandson." I thought about every sacrifice. Working doubles while 7 months pregnant, walking to work in snowstorms to save gas money. "Remember Christmas?" I said, tears starting. "When I wrapped Tommy's presents in newspaper because we couldn't afford wrapping paper? When he said Santa must be tired this year because there were only 3 gifts? You had $500 that December. Another $500 in November." My voice cracked. $1,000 while I told our son Santa was struggling too. I scrolled through more transactions. Every Friday night, while I worked late shifts, thinking he was home with Tommy. "These withdrawals match your overtime nights." His mother was crying now. I thought I was helping. He said Tommy needed specialized treatment. I laughed bitterly. Tommy needed a father who didn't steal from him. Do you know what he did last month? He tried to give me his birthday money, $5 from his piggy bank, because he heard me crying about the electric bill. He's 5 years old and trying to support his family while you spent $500 on lap dances. I found more texts on his phone, to someone named Rosie. "Can't wait to see you Friday. The kid's money just hit." "The kid's money," I repeated. "That's what you called it. Your mother sent $9,000 for her sick grandson, and you called it the kid's money, to your stripper girlfriend." I thought about Tommy's worn shoes, the ones I'd taped together because we couldn't afford new ones, his coat that was 2 sizes too small, the field trip he missed because we didn't have the $20 fee. Do you know what he said when I told him he couldn't go to the zoo with his class? I was sobbing now. "It's okay, Mommy. I'll see animals and books." While you were making it rain at a strip club with his money, his mother stood up and turned to Peter. "I sold jewelry to help. I thought he was sick." "He is sick," I said quietly. "Sick of being poor. Sick of watching his mother skip meals. He asked me last week if maybe he could live with just 1 meal a day too, to help save money. He's 5. Last week he drew a picture at school. Want to know what it was? His family, but he drew himself very small in the corner. His teacher asked why. He said, "I don't take up much space or money." I held up the crumpled drawing. "You made our baby hate himself for existing while you partied with money meant for him." Peter's mother was pulling out her phone again. "I'm calling Charles," she said coldly, "and our lawyer." She looked at me. "Keep all those bank records. We're getting you full custody." She turned to Peter. "You stole from a child, your own child, while lying to me about his health." As she dialed, Peter grabbed his keys. "Where are you going?" I demanded. "To fix this?" He laughed bitterly. "To Crystal's. At least she appreciates what I provide." "With your son's money," his mother said, phone to her ear. "Charles, come home. Now." She looked at Peter with disgust. Tommy ran inside just then, his little face bright with joy. "Mommy, can we have cake now?" He looked around at everyone crying. "Did I do something wrong? I can skip cake if we need to save it." I dropped to my knees and pulled Tommy into my arms, holding him tight against my chest. "No, baby, you didn't do anything wrong." His small body was tense at first, but then he relaxed into me. Peter's mother wiped her eyes and went to the counter, cutting a big piece of chocolate cake with shaking hands. She put it on Tommy's favorite dinosaur plate and added extra sprinkles on top. "This is all for you, sweetie." Tommy's face lit up and he took the plate carefully. Walking to the living room where I turned on his cartoons, he settled on the couch with his cake, already lost in the show about talking trains. Peter's mother and I went back to the kitchen table where she pulled out her phone again, scrolling through 18 months of bank transfers. She showed me every single one, $500 on the 3rd of each month, all going to that same account ending in 5333. Her face was hard now, not crying anymore, just angry at being lied to by her own son. "I sold my mother's pearl necklace for this." She pointed at a transfer from last March. Peter said Tommy needed breathing treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. I took pictures of her phone screen with mine, making sure I got every transfer clearly. We heard the front door open and Charles walked in, still in his work clothes from the office. His wife started explaining everything before he even set down his briefcase. His face got darker with each word, especially when she showed him the strip club charges on Peter's bank account. He pulled out his phone and called someone, putting it on speaker so we could hear. "Jim, it's Charles. We need help with a custody situation." The lawyer's voice came through clear, explaining that with this kind of financial abuse and proof of lying, getting emergency custody wouldn't be hard. He told us to document everything and come to his office first thing Monday morning. That night, after I tucked Tommy into bed and read him 3 stories, I sat at our old computer and started taking screenshots. Every bank transaction from Peter's account that his mother had shown me. Every text message on his phone that I'd seen, especially the ones to Rosie about the kid's money. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to be careful, to get everything. I saved it all to a folder on the desktop and then emailed copies to myself and to Peter's mother. She'd given me her email and told me to send her everything for the lawyer. I found more texts I'd missed before. Peter telling someone named Crystal about his nagging wife and how he deserved to have fun. There were pictures too, him at the club with girls sitting on his lap while Tommy and I were home eating rice and beans. Peter's mother called around 10 that night after I'd finished with the computer. She said she wanted to buy Tommy new clothes tomorrow since his were all worn out. "I'm coming by at 9 with cash. Real money this time, not promises." She sounded so angry still. "And keep the receipts for court." I agreed and thanked her, though it felt strange taking help from her after everything. The next morning, I made Tommy pancakes with a mix Peter's mother had brought over yesterday for his birthday. He sat at the table swinging his legs, syrup on his chin. "Mommy, where's Daddy?" I sat down next to him and kept my voice calm. "Daddy needs to stay somewhere else for a while to think about some grown-up stuff." Tommy's face fell and he looked at his pancakes. "Is it because I asked for cake? I can give it back." My heart broke again and I pulled him onto my lap. "No, baby, this has nothing to do with you or cake. Sometimes grown-ups need space face to figure things out. He nodded, but I could tell he didn't really understand. After breakfast, I drove to the bank while Tommy was at the school. The banker, a woman about my mom's age, helped me open my own checking account in just my name. I moved my work direct deposit to the new account, and then asked about the joint account Peter and I shared. She pulled it up and showed me there was only $43 left. She helped me freeze it so Peter couldn't take even that small amount. Happens more than you'd think, she said quietly. Back home, I spent 2 hours on the phone with the electric company, the gas company, and the water department. Each call was the same, explaining that I was going through a divorce and needed to set up payment plans. The electric company was understanding and gave me 3 months to catch up. The gas company wanted half up front, but agreed to a plan for the rest. The shame burned in my throat having to beg these strangers for help, but I did it for Tommy. My phone started buzzing with texts from Peter around lunchtime. You're overreacting. Then 5 minutes later, this is all your fault. Then, you turned my mother against me. I texted back once just to say all communication needed to go through email for documentation. Then I blocked his number. Peter's mother picked me up at 2 and we drove to the children's store downtown. She watched as I picked out a winter coat that actually fit Tommy, warm boots without holes, and 3 pairs of jeans that weren't too short. At the register, she paid in cash and made sure I got the receipt. Then she took pictures of everything, including Tommy's old shoes with duct tape holding them together. For court, she said grimly. When we got back to the house, Peter's mother helped me carry the bags inside while Tommy ran ahead to show his stuffed animals his new coat. What's really going through Peter's mind when he just walks out to go to Crystal's place? There's something strange about how quickly he gives up trying to explain himself after getting caught stealing $9,000 meant for his own child's medical care. I went straight to Tommy's room and found his inhaler on the nightstand, the one I'd been stretching for 3 months now. I held it up to the window and took a picture with my phone, making sure the date on the prescription label showed clearly. The bottle was supposed to last 30 days, but I'd made it last 90. I found that drawing Tommy made at the school, the one where he drew himself tiny in the corner, and laid it flat on the kitchen table to photograph. Peter's mother watched as I created a folder on my laptop labeled Evidence and started uploading everything. The bank screenshots, the text messages, the inhaler, the drawing, even pictures of Tommy's old shoes and coat. I backed it all up to the cloud and emailed copies to myself and to Peter's mother. She gave me the lawyer's email too, and I sent everything there. After she left, I picked up the phone and called Tommy's school. The secretary answered on the second ring, and I explained that we were going through some family changes, and I wanted to set up a meeting with a counselor. She was so kind, saying she understood how hard these things were, and that they had lots of resources to help kids adjust. She scheduled us for the next morning at 9, right after drop-off. That night felt weird without Peter there. Tommy kept asking where Daddy was, and I kept telling him Daddy was staying somewhere else for a while. We ate mac and cheese for dinner, the good kind with real cheese, not the powder, because Peter's mother had bought groceries. Tommy fell asleep in my bed after 3 stories, and I carried him to his room. I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and wrote down what mattered now. Keep Tommy safe, keep him stable, make sure he knows none of this is his fault. Tell him the truth when he's old enough to understand. The next morning at the school, the counselor met us in her office filled with toys and puppets. She was gentle with Tommy, using a bear puppet to ask him how he was feeling. Tommy picked up a smaller puppet and made it hide behind a pillow. She let him play while she talked to me quietly about how withdrawn he'd been lately in class. She said she'd check in with him every week and gave me pamphlets about helping kids through divorce. 3 days later, we had Tommy's regular checkup at the pediatrician. I explained everything to the doctor while Tommy played with the blood pressure cuff. She listened carefully and took notes, then examined Tommy thoroughly. She documented his asthma treatment history in his file and noted some signs of stress like nail biting and trouble sleeping. Before we left, she wrote a letter on official letterhead stating that Tommy had never been treated for any allergies in their practice, only asthma. She made copies for me and said she'd send one directly to the lawyer too. The following Monday, I met with Melinda Beckwith at her office downtown. Peter's parents were paying for her and she came highly recommended. She reviewed all my evidence, spreading the papers across her big desk and making notes on a yellow pad. She filed for emergency temporary custody right away and explained the process would take several weeks, but the evidence was strong. She said Peter abandoning the home to stay with another woman would work in our favor. She pulled out a leather journal and slid it across the desk to me. She told me to document everything from now on, every interaction with Peter, every expense for Tommy, every milestone or problem. She showed me her template with columns for date, time, event, and witnesses. Judges love thorough records, she said, and this would help establish patterns of behavior. 2 days later, Peter's mother called while I was washing dishes. Her voice cracked as she told me she'd set up a new bank account just for Tommy's actual medical needs. She was still processing that she'd sold her mother's emerald ring to help with treatments that never existed. She said she'd put money in every month, but this time both of us would be trustees, so nobody could steal from Tommy again. Every withdrawal would need both our signatures. I thanked her and we both cried a little on the phone. The next week, I asked my supervisor if we could talk privately. I explained I was now a single parent and needed stable hours to match Tommy's school schedule. She'd been through divorce herself and understood immediately. She adjusted my shifts so I worked 9 to 3 while Tommy was at the school, and even gave me a small raise for taking on some extra paperwork duties. She said she remembered how hard it was and wanted to help however she could. The child support office was downtown in a building that smelled like old paper and cleaning products. I took a number and waited 2 hours in a plastic chair while Tommy colored at my feet. The caseworker finally called us up and handed me a stack of forms. She explained I'd need Peter's employment information, his social security number, and copies of all our financial documents. She warned me it could take 3 to 6 months before any payment started coming in, and even then, enforcement could be difficult. I filled out every form carefully while she made copies of Tommy's birth certificate and our marriage license. She gave me a case number and told me to call every 2 weeks to check a status. Tommy fell asleep in the car on the way home and I carried him inside, his new coat keeping him warm against the wind. 3 days later, Peter's mother called while I was folding laundry and asked if we could talk about visits. She said Peter wanted to see Tommy, and maybe she could supervise at her house to make sure everything stayed safe. I gripped the phone harder and thought about Tommy asking why Daddy wasn't home anymore. She promised she'd watch every second and wouldn't let Peter say anything about the divorce or make promises he couldn't keep. I told her I needed rules written down first. No talking about court stuff, no blaming anyone, no gifts without asking me, and she had to tell me if Peter did anything weird. She agreed to everything and said she'd email me the rules, so we both had copies. The next morning, I met with Melinda at her office, and she spread out more paperwork paperwork across her big desk. She explained she was filing motions for a financial restraining order to freeze our joint accounts and keep Peter from hiding money or selling our stuff. She also wanted exclusive use of the house so Tommy could stay in his home and not have more changes. The stack of papers made my head spin, but she walked me through each one, showing me where to sign and explaining what everything meant. She said the judge would probably approve it since Peter left on his own and was staying with that woman Crystal. Saturday morning came too fast, and I dressed Tommy in his favorite dinosaur shirt for his first visit at Grandma's house. He grabbed my leg at the door and wouldn't let go, his little fingers digging into my jeans while Peter's mother knelt down and promised they'd bake chocolate chip cookies. I peeled his hands off gently and kissed his head, telling him I'd be back in 3 hours and to have fun with Grandma. Peter's mother picked him up and carried him inside while he reached for me over her shoulder. I made it to my car before the tears started and sat there for 10 minutes watching the house, making sure he didn't run back out. My phone buzzed Monday afternoon with an email from Peter saying he'd pay me $500 cash every month if I dropped the custody case and let him see Tommy whenever he wanted. I didn't even finish reading it before forwarding it to Melinda, who called me 20 minutes later laughing. She said this was perfect evidence of him trying to avoid court and proper child support, and she'd add it to our file for the judge to see. Tuesday, the school counselor called during my lunch break, and her voice sounded worried. She said Tommy had been telling kids he was trying not to cost money and had been giving away his fruit snacks and crackers at lunch to other kids. She'd talked to him, and he said he wanted to help save money so mommy wouldn't cry anymore. She gave me the name of a therapist, Desmond Barfield, who worked with kids and used a sliding scale for payment based on income. I wrote down his number with shaking hands and called as soon as we hung up. The intake appointment was Thursday afternoon in a small office with toys everywhere. Desmond was this tall black man with a gentle voice who sat on the floor with Tommy and showed him all the toys and games they could play with. He explained to Tommy that this was a place to talk about big feelings and play at the same time. Then he talked to me while Tommy built with blocks, saying we'd work on helping Tommy understand he deserves to take up space and have his needs met just like everyone else. We scheduled weekly appointments and I filled out more paperwork about our income for the sliding scale fee. Friday morning, Peter's mother called and said her lawyer was setting up a trust fund for Tommy with both of us as trustees. She explained that every dollar would need both our signatures to withdraw, so nobody could ever steal from Tommy again. She sounded tired but determined and said she'd already put in the first $1,000 from selling some old coins. The paperwork would be ready next week and we'd meet at the bank to sign everything. That night around 10, I was washing dishes when I heard pounding on the front door. Peter was yelling that he needed to talk to me right now, and I could see him through the peephole swaying a little. I locked the deadbolt and grabbed my phone, calling the police non-emergency number while he kept banging. I told them my soon-to-be ex-husband was at my door after being told to stay away, and I had a child sleeping upstairs. They said they'd send someone and I should stay inside and not engage with him. I wrote down everything in the journal Melinda gave me, the time he showed up, what he yelled, how long he stayed, while Tommy slept through it all in his room. Peter's mother keeps showing up with help after realizing her son lied about Tommy's medical needs. That's making me wonder what else she knows that she hasn't said yet. There's something about how quick she is with lawyers and bank accounts that feels like she saw this coming. The officers arrived 15 minutes later, and I watched through the window as they talked to Peter and then made him leave. One officer came to the door after and gave me a report number for my records. Monday, Melinda called to say she'd subpoenaed the records from Diamond's Gentlemen's Club to prove Peter spent Tommy's money there. She said they had to provide all credit card receipts and transaction records for the past 2 years. The manager tried to fight it, but the judge ordered them to comply, and now we'd have proof of every dollar Peter spent there on the exact dates his mother's money hit his account. She said the paper trail was going to bury him in court. Wednesday afternoon, I came home to find a red notice taped to my door from the electric company. Even with the payment plan we'd set up, they wanted the full past due amount, or they'd shut off service in 5 days. I called Peter's mother crying, and she drove over immediately with her checkbook. She paid the full amount at the payment center and kept the receipt, adding it to a folder she was keeping for court. She hugged me and said nobody would let Tommy go without power on her watch. Thursday afternoon, I drove Tommy to his first real therapy session with Desmond and watched through the window as they sat on the floor with a box of toy figures between them. Tommy picked up a small boy figure and made it hide behind a couch, while a bigger figure stomped around looking angry, and Desmond nodded and wrote notes on his clipboard. For 45 minutes, Tommy acted out scenes with the toys, making the little boy figure try to help the mommy figure who was crying and the daddy figure who kept leaving the house. When the session ended, Desmond walked out with Tommy and asked me to step aside while Tommy played with blocks in the waiting area. He told me Tommy was processing everything really well, but needed lots of consistency right now, and most important was making sure he understood that grown-up problems weren't his job to fix. I scheduled our next appointment and drove home thinking about all the times Tommy had tried to fix things that weren't his responsibility. 2 days later, Melinda called to tell me the court date for temporary orders was scheduled for 3 weeks from Tuesday, and we needed to meet Monday to go over everything one more time. I drove to her office that afternoon while Tommy was at the school, and she spread out all our documents across the conference table, bank statements and text messages, and the doctor's letter about Tommy never having allergies. She walked me through what would happen in court, how the judge would ask questions, and what Peter's lawyer might try to argue, and made me practice answering questions without getting emotional or going off topic. We spent 2 hours reviewing every piece of evidence, and she kept reminding me to stick to facts and let the documents speak for themselves. That weekend, Peter's mother came over while Tommy was napping and sat at my kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. She started talking about Peter's childhood and how his father was always working, and she felt guilty for not being enough, so she gave him things instead of boundaries. Her voice got quiet when she said she should have seen the signs, but she wanted to believe her son was a good father, and she was sorry for not protecting Tommy from Peter's lies. She promised she would do whatever it took to support what was best for Tommy now, even if that meant testifying against her own son in court. Monday morning, my supervisor called me into her office, and I thought I was in trouble for all the time I'd been taking off for lawyer meetings and court stuff. Instead, she told me she was promoting me to shift lead with $1.50 more per hour and a set schedule that would work better for single parenting. It wasn't a huge raise, but the stable hours meant I could plan childcare better, and the extra $60 a week would help with groceries and gas. I thanked her and almost cried right there in her office because even small wins felt huge when everything else was falling apart. That night, I found an email from Peter saying he was going to start counseling and wanted me to know he was trying to change, but he wouldn't tell me where the rest of the money went or admit to anything specific. I forwarded it straight to Melinda, who called me back within an hour saying this was perfect because it showed he still wasn't taking real responsibility, and judges don't like that. She added it to our file along with everything else we'd been collecting. 3 nights later, I woke up to pounding on the door again at 2 in the morning and saw Peter through the peephole yelling that he needed his tools from the garage. I called 911 this time while he kept banging and yelling, and Tommy woke up crying, asking if Daddy was mad at him. The police arrived fast, and I heard them telling Peter he was violating a no-contact order and needed to leave immediately or he'd be arrested. After they left, I spent an hour getting Tommy back to sleep and then wrote everything down with times and details for Melinda. The next Friday, it happened again, but this time Peter showed up at Tommy's school during pickup trying to talk to me in front of all the other parents. The principal saw what was happening and called the police herself while keeping Peter in the office away from the pickup area. I grabbed Tommy and drove straight to Melinda's office, where she immediately filed for supervised visitation only, saying the documentation of Peter showing up at the house twice, and the school once made it clear he couldn't respect boundaries. She said no judge would give him unsupervised time with Tommy when he couldn't even follow a simple no-contact order. Tommy's teacher called me the next week with good news for once, saying Tommy was participating more in class and had made a friend named Marcus, who he played with at recess every day. She said he was still having some tough moments, but overall he seemed happier, and was even raising his hand to answer questions sometimes. Small victories felt massive when I'd been so worried about how all this chaos was affecting him at the school. The bank manager called Thursday to say the detailed report Melinda requested was ready, showing every transfer from Peter's mother matched deposits to account 5,333 down to the penny. I picked up the thick folder of statements and transaction records that showed 18 months of deposits and withdrawals with Peter's name on every single one. Melinda added it to our court filing that afternoon, saying this paper trail was undeniable proof of exactly where Tommy's medical money went. Saturday morning, I found a video message from Peter in my email that started with him saying sorry, but quickly turned into him blaming me for not understanding his stress and his mother for putting pressure on him, and even Tommy for being expensive. I watched it once to make sure there wasn't anything important, then saved it and forwarded it to Melinda, who said it was perfect evidence of manipulation and blame shifting that would help our case. That night after dinner, Desmond had suggested in our last session that we needed to create predictable routines to help Tommy feel secure in all the chaos. We started a new bedtime ritual where we'd read one book together, then talk about our day with Tommy telling me his favorite part and his hardest part, and then we'd each say 3 good things that happened no matter how small they were. The first night, Tommy said his 3 good things were Marcus sharing his goldfish crackers, finding a cool rock at recess, and Mommy letting him pick the bedtime story. The next morning, Melinda called me while I was making Tommy's breakfast and said Peter's lawyer had filed their response to our custody petition, claiming the whole thing was just a big misunderstanding. She read parts of it to me over the phone, and I could hear her trying not to laugh when she got to the part where Peter claimed he thought the money from his mother was a gift for him to use however he wanted. I stirred Tommy's oatmeal and listened to her explain that no judge would believe someone thought money specifically mentioned as being for a child's medical treatment was actually meant for strip clubs. She told me to come by her office that afternoon to review our strategy for the hearing, and I arranged for Tommy to stay late at after-school care. When I got to Melinda's office, she had Peter's mother already there, going through her phone records and text messages from the past 18 months. Peter's mother showed us message after message where Peter had sent her updates about Tommy's fake allergies, including made-up doctor names and treatment plans he'd supposedly researched. Her face got harder with each text she read, and when she found one where Peter had asked for extra money because Tommy supposedly needed a special air filter for his room, she slammed her phone down on the desk. She told Melinda she would testify about every single lie Peter had told her, and she didn't care if it meant her own son might face criminal charges for fraud. Melinda took notes on everything and said having a witness who was also a victim would make our case even stronger. That night after Tommy was asleep, I sat at my computer and started writing my victim impact statement that Melinda said the judge would want to see. I typed about the taped shoes and the too small coat and how Tommy had tried to give me his birthday money when he heard me crying about bills. I wrote about him missing the zoo field trip and saying he'd just look at animals in books, and how he'd drawn himself tiny in the corner because he didn't want to take up space or money. My hands shook as I typed about rationing his asthma inhaler, while Peter spent hundreds at strip clubs, and I had to stop several times to wipe my eyes so I could see the screen. Peter's mother sitting at that kitchen table with cold tea talking about giving her son things instead of boundaries makes me wonder if she's seeing patterns she ignored before. There's something interesting about how she connects his dad always working to her guilt to Peter's current behavior with money. I printed it out and read it over 3 times, making sure I'd included every detail about how Peter's theft had hurt our son. 2 weeks later, we sat in the courtroom for the temporary orders hearing, and I watched the judge read through the thick folder of evidence Melinda had prepared. The judge looked at the bank statements showing every transfer from Peter's mother matched deposits into Peter's account, and then immediate withdrawals to Diamond's Gentleman's Club. She read the text messages where Peter called it the kid's money, and studied the photos of Tommy's taped shoes and too small coat. Peter's lawyer tried to argue that Peter had been under stress and made some poor financial decisions, but the judge cut him off and said stealing money meant for a sick child wasn't a poor decision, but a deliberate pattern of deception. She reviewed the counselor's notes about Tommy's anxiety and self-blame, and the doctor's letter confirming he'd never been treated for allergies. The judge asked Peter directly if he had anything to say, and he mumbled something about providing for his family in other ways, but couldn't give any specific examples when pressed. After 45 minutes of reviewing evidence, the judge said she was ready to make her ruling, and I held my breath. She granted me temporary sole custody, with Peter getting supervised visits at his mother's house on Wednesdays and Saturdays from 10 to 4. She ordered that all communication between Peter and me had to go through a court-approved parenting app, and he was not to contact me directly by phone, text, email, or in person. The financial restraining order was approved immediately, and Peter was ordered to pay $300 a month in child support, which wasn't much considering what he'd stolen, but at least it was something official. The judge then ordered Peter to complete a 12-week parenting class and undergo a full psychological evaluation before she would even consider unsupervised visits with Tommy. She gave him 6 months to show compliance with all court orders, and said if he missed even one child support payment or violated the no-contact order, she would revisit the custody arrangement. Peter's lawyer asked about holidays, and the judge said supervised visits only until further notice, and that included birthdays and Christmas. When we left the courthouse, Peter's mother asked me to sit with her in her car to work out a detailed schedule for the visits. We made a calendar calendar with exact pickup and drop-off times, and she promised to text me through the app if Peter was even 5 minutes late or if anything concerning happened during visits. She said she wasn't going to let Peter be alone with Tommy even for a minute, and she'd already set up the guest room with toys and books for the visits. We weren't friends, and probably never would be, but we both wanted to protect Tommy, and that was enough to work together. The next day at work, I stopped by Human Resources to ask about the emergency assistance program I'd heard other employees mention. The woman there helped me fill out the application and said they could probably help with my back rent since I was going through a documented family crisis. A week later, they approved a grant for $2,000, which covered 2 months of rent and meant I could finally stop worrying about eviction notices. That Thursday was Tommy's regular therapy appointment with Desmond, and I watched through the observation window as Tommy used his words to ask for what he needed instead of just accepting whatever was offered. Desmond had him practice saying things like, "I need a hug," and "Can you read me another story?" and "I'm hungry," without apologizing or making himself small. At bedtime that night, Tommy actually asked me to read him 3 stories instead of just 1, and when I said yes, his whole face lit up like I'd given him the best present ever. 3 days passed before Melinda called with news that Peter had finally completed his intake at the counseling center, and his lawyer had sent over the paperwork proving he'd enrolled in the 12-week program. I filed the document in my growing custody folder while Tommy played with blocks on the living room floor, building towers and knocking them down with careful concentration. Peter's mother texted through the parenting app that she'd deposited $2,000 into the new trust account she'd set up for Tommy, sending screenshots of the bank confirmation that showed both our names as trustees. Every withdrawal would need both signatures now, protecting the money from anyone who might try to take it again. I spent the next week searching apartment listings in Tommy's school district, calling landlords and scheduling viewings during my lunch breaks at work. The third place I looked at was smaller than our house, but clean and bright with a playground visible from the kitchen window. The landlord ran my credit and approved me on the spot when I explained I was going through a divorce and had stable employment. Tommy helped me pack his toys into boxes, carefully wrapping his favorite stuffed animals in his old baby blankets while I sorted through kitchen items and clothes. Moving day came 2 weeks later with Peter's mother helping us load everything into a rented truck while Peter stayed away per the court order. Tommy ran through the empty rooms of our old house one last time, his footsteps echoing on the bare floors before climbing into his car seat for the drive to our new home. Setting up the apartment took all weekend, but Tommy loved arranging his new room, putting his drawings on the walls with tape and organizing his books on the low shelf I'd bought at a thrift store. Wednesday's supervised visit at his grandmother's house started with Tommy clutching a folder of drawings he'd made in therapy with Desmond, pictures showing different faces for different feelings. Peter sat stiffly on his mother's couch as Tommy showed him each one, explaining how the angry face meant he needed space and the sad face meant he wanted hugs. Peter's hands shook slightly as he held the papers, actually looking at Tommy instead of his phone for once, though I watched from the kitchen doorway without commenting on his reactions. The following Monday, I met with Melinda to sign the legal separation papers, 20 pages of terms about asset division and custody arrangements that would protect Tommy and me going forward. She filed everything with the court that afternoon and gave me copies for my records, explaining we'd have a final hearing in 3 months to make everything official. 2 nights later, Tommy and I celebrated our new apartment by baking a chocolate cake from scratch, flour covering every surface of our tiny kitchen as we mixed and measured. He licked the spoon while I put the pan in the oven, both of us laughing when the timer went off and we could finally taste our creation. The electricity stayed on the whole time, no longer something I worried about as I watched Tommy eat 2 slices with milk. Melinda called the next morning to confirm our final custody hearing was scheduled for June 15th, reviewing Peter's compliance so far with his counseling attendance and child support payments. She'd organized all our documentation into labeled folders, ready for whatever arguments Peter's lawyer might try to make at the hearing. Spring turned into summer as we settled into our new routine, Tommy thriving in therapy with Desmond and bringing home good reports from the school about making friends and participating in class. My supervisor gave me another small raise after my annual review, noting my reliability and dedication despite everything I'd been dealing with at home. Peter kept attending his required counseling sessions according to the reports Melinda received, never missing an appointment or payment deadline. His mother picked Tommy up every Saturday morning for their zoo trips and museum visits, finally able to give him the experiences she'd been trying to fund all along. 6 months after that horrible day in the kitchen, we'd found our balance with Tommy, understanding through therapy that none of the bad things were his fault. He no longer made himself small or worried about costing too much money, asking for seconds at dinner and new library books without apologizing. I'd learned to accept help when offered, whether from Peter's mother or my coworkers who'd become real friends through this process. Peter maintained his required counseling and supervised visits, though whether he'd truly changed remained to be seen in the years ahead. The apartment wasn't fancy, and money was still tight, but it was honest and stable and free from lies about medical conditions that didn't exist. Tommy knew without question that every penny spent on him was worth it, that he deserved good things and love and attention just for being himself. Most importantly, he'd stopped trying to save us by making himself smaller, instead growing into the bright, confident child he was always meant to be. Well, that's a wrap on this journey we've taken together. Thanks for letting me wonder along with you all this time. And if you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.